what was the defining moment made you realize that finance or helping startup founders is the core thing that you would like to do?
I think there's not actually a single defining moment. It's not finance alone that's the lever for impact, right? For me, the real impact comes from a combination of values, be it truthfulness, integrity, ethics, empathy. And finance is one way to put those values into action.
You have led teams in Germany, Brazil, Mexico, Switzerland, and of course here in the US. How do you adapt financial leadership across such culturally different environments and multiple continents? How do you do that?
Well, it's an interesting question because if you think about it, every culture has its idiosyncrasies, right? If I talk about the Swiss and the Germans, they like everything very precise, and we have meetings over meetings over meetings until you finally get to the end point where you say, okay, now we can implement it. Versus, and there is financial forecasting very important. Everything has to be fit. If you go to Latin American countries, which I was part of, you go into those and it is more like, finance is important, but the personal aspect is much more important. Into the aspect of, I trust you, you're my friend, we can get this done. So this is the Latin American side. Now we have the US side, which is really where agility is important and it needs to be done quickly, versus the German side. So when you do the cross country or cross nation-wise, and you go have a conversation, a board meeting in Germany with Americans or vice versa, you clearly see this difference. Americans get really antsy about, why are you guys talking about these little details? Let's just do it. While the Germans don't understand the Americans and go, wait, we cannot do this to our customers. It has to be perfect. So it's always an interesting conversation. And so that's how, if you look at my name of the company I work with, Global Bridge, is exactly that. I am trying to bridge both sides. That's the reason for the name Global Bridge. So yes, that's basically the tendency that you have to go into.
Thank you, Volker, for that answer. Now let's talk about your role as the fractional CFO. I always feel that anything fractional, be it the CMO role, CFO role, CIO role, it is a smart growth engine. How do you convince a founder that really they are not need a full-time talent as the CFO at this stage of life, and the fractional CFO will be a better option for them? How do they see it? How do you make them, or convince them that go to the route of the fractional CFO?
That's also a very good question, because it is a very difficult conversation to have with a startup who thinks that a fractional CFO is just a bookkeeper, a controller. Tell me this. And it's exactly not what we are. We are actually a compass. So we're not controllers looking at the past. We're looking up to the future. So we're trying to build, we're supposed to be a counterpart to the CEO, telling them what we see from a financial perspective, what you can do. And that's one of the things I think most of the founders only later understand, especially when then you go into a conversation about due diligence, right? And then numbers are asked for. And people come up to you and say, well, can you give me the next forecast for 5 years? And how did you do all that? Sometimes it's just too much for the founders. And if you can't answer those questions, then you should have somebody fractional, because full-time, it's not feasible. It's too expensive and not necessary, not in the beginning.
Right. So true. So at what stage should a startup or a mid-market company seriously consider that they need a fractional CFO to come in and help them? At what stage they should be in?
Well, the interesting part on that one is we always get asked too late, right? We don't get asked proactively, hey, let's sit together and talk about it. It's usually we get asked to come in when it's already at the later stage, there's problems, there's questions about it. And it would have been much more efficient, and now comes the German in me, it's much more efficient to circumvent that and start from the beginning instead of trying to fix a problem. So it is best to start, even a startup, a small startup, should not shy away from asking fractional CFOs for advice. That doesn't mean you have to have them full staff all the time on it. Definitely not. But they can give you a lot of insight on how to formulate or do certain things. Because remember, our founders are usually technical and not, or they're very much oriented about the product. But the finance part is also part of this story that I have to tell in order to get funding, for example. So
Right.
where you usually get asked too late, I would always counter with, I would find a fractional CFO that you feel comfortable. This is another one thing that you have to be very careful about, is that you feel comfortable to talk. If the chemistry is not there, similar to investors, if the chemistry is not there, do not take their money and do not hire them, because you're going to regret it eventually. This is another relationship, and that's what I call it. It's a relationship, and therefore make sure you pick the right people.
Yeah, Volker, just for the benefit of startup founders who are considering for a fractional role of a CFO, CMO, let's focus on CFO. How much does it cost to have a fractional CFO to come in and help the founder in future round of fundraising or help them in being on track?
Okay, the way it's similar to the question when you go to a car dealership and they're asking you how much does the car cost, and they're saying, well, how much do you have on a budget? And we can make parallels to this. So I think it really depends. I've seen people working on very low budget, and I've seen people who charge you similar to a lawyer's fee, which
Wow.
nowadays I just figured out is it used to be $1,000 an hour, and they're up to $2,000 if they're partners in a bigger company. So it really is a question not of how much it cost, but how much can he add value to your proposition. So this is
Yes.
how I see it more like it. So if you go and ask a CFO and say, okay, so let's see, can we talk and find out which way you're going to help me to either secure funds or make my operations more profitable? I see it more on that side instead of saying, oh, he's going to cost me money. Now he's supposed to bring you added value. And how much is that added value? It really depends. I've had engagements where, and after half an hour, we solved the problem. That was multiple thousands of dollars savings for them. But I also had engagements where I worked for 2 years, and that was more like of an interim, a CFO, where it is a different price tag. So there is no right or wrong answer.
Right, right, understood. Yeah, but it gives my listeners a very good analogy that how they should look in hiring a fractional officer to come in and help them. Let's talk about your international expansion, Volker. You have helped a ton of companies to come and do cross-border businesses. What are three or four most common blind spots that these companies face when they are expanding internationally?
That's a very good question. I there is blind spots. Is always a difficult story because you don't want to step on anybody's toes. But for my experience, what I've seen is when they go into international expansion, for example, um, they underestimate the tax and the regulatory complexity. So, in other words, the corporate taxes, the local entity requirements that you have. So that's one of the ones. A pet peeve of mine is transfer pricing. Okay, that's definitely if not for founders, but for companies that are existing and outsourcing and going, okay, I'll build another factory or a facility where I sell. transfer pricing in countries is a problem. Therefore, the tax regulation. The second one, it's the risk is currency and cash mobility.
Yeah.
If you look at Latin American countries, they used to be, and this many years ago, if you invested in Brazil, they would not let you take out the money. So you could not take out the money. Other countries had restrictions of how much money you can pay back as a dividend. So that's one of
Mhm.
the things. Plus the foreign exchange. You know, there is fluctuations, and it can hurt. And we all know at this times, if you look at the exchange rates to different countries, they fluctuated tremendously for reasons of tariffs and other things. But that's another one. And then the other one is that we kind of assume, from a financial perspective, that what we are doing in one country applies to another.
Mhm.
Um, it's not necessarily just a gap, so the accounting procedures, but it has to do with the fact that labor costs, the payment terms. Typical example in Germany, for example, your payment terms are 7 days, 2%, 30 days net, and that's kind of a common theme. Um, Here, I have customers who want to pay in 60 days and still want 2%. So what's custom? What's right? So you gotta have to think about this, and of course also about the logistics, which is part of the financial model. So there's a many different aspects that are important to look at, but think about before you go. I have
Mhm.
many companies who say, "Oh, I have a customer in," to take an example, in Mexico. Okay, I'm going to open an office in Mexico. I declare the office. I call my lawyers. I go to my accountants. I'm going to open an office there. Well, you should think about all the things beforehand before you spend all that money. You might just
Right.
find out that it's not worth it.
Yeah, yeah. So, in Startup Steroid, the company that Assis and I co-founded, we have come up with a AI tool for Ready Score, because after sitting through so many pitching events and the startup founders reaching out to us as an angel to invest in them, we found out that they are really not ready to go and talk to angel investor. And we always feel that really you get only one chance to be in front of the investor. Otherwise, the typical answer is that hey, you are too early, too late, or show us some traction, come back to us in about six
Correct.
months time, which
Yeah.
is a polite way of saying no. So what we have done, we have built an AI engine to evaluate a company on 40 parameters and then churn out a ready score to them, that how ready they are for angel investor. I see you bring in a lot of company from international to here in the US for their global expansion. How do you determine that they are operationally ready to go into a new country? Do you provide those services? What is the model looks like?
I do provide those services, and that's why, as I said, the global bridge in itself is the wording. Um, but I think the important part is to understand the model that you have in one country doesn't necessarily apply in another country. So that said, for startups, and we're talking about startups, right? Funders, are they
Yes.
ready to be investable? And one of the things, as the ex-chair for screening at Tech Coast Angels, was that you see a lot of pitches where you go, if you would have had somebody else look through the pitch deck one more time, or you would have found out that there's 20 spelling mistakes in it. The numbers on the Excel sheet that you have, you transposed without any addition, so they're wrong. Um, the story that you're telling me is not necessarily the right one. And yes, you probably in your program say, you know what, those are all kind of a red flag, if you want to call them that way. And you miss your opportunity. You have a great product. You have maybe a revolutionary product, but if you don't are not particularly careful about the way you present it, because it's all about trust, right? So we are looking at your product, we're looking at you as the jockey, and as we like to call it, the horse. The horse might be great, but if the jockey is, don't want to say sloppy, then we might not believe that you'll be able to execute. So one of the things that we always say is make sure that somebody else reads over it. Make sure some people look closely at the details so that when you present it to an angel group, as is yours or ours, um, that it is ready. Because once you ruin your reputation, and we are, as you said earlier, we're in different groups, members of different groups, and we do talk. We do talk between each other and say, "Hey, this was a great company, a great product. I just wish that CEO would have done that a little bit different." And we give them the feedback, and I hope that the CEOs then will adapt to that. But you missed a great opportunity. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Volker. Now let's talk about your M&A due diligence and board strategy roles that you have played with various companies and helped various startups doing that. You have led due diligence. Due diligence is also a service offering of your company for complex M&A deals, real complex. What are the red flags that you can see very early on in the due diligence process? And I would like to get an answer from you so that the founders who will be ready for a M&A tomorrow or in few months, few years, need to focus on those things that, let's not make those silly and stupid mistakes and do it the right way.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we all should be clear on is you have a limited time to pitch to an angel. So, or to anybody. As a matter of fact, you only have a couple minutes and you might have worked on this product for 10 years. So you have a story to tell, and the story needs to be coherent. It needs to be understandable. It cannot be that we as listeners are trying to be understanding your product. We are more into the business opportunities. So we want to know about the business opportunity. One of the red flags right there is that you're telling me a story that is not coherent in the sense of you show me a pitch deck and it includes past numbers. And let's say just it's a year old and you already declared taxes. Believe it or not, I am one of the guys who looks at your tax return because you might lie to me, but not to the IRS. So when you do those, make sure that the thing flows, that it's what you're talking about is really what is happening. So make sure that there is a flow to it. The numbers need to be relatively, and we all know they're all predictions. So you cannot predict 5 years down the line how much sales you're going to have. And I really don't care that much about it. I know it's going to be a hockey stick, whoops, like that, but I do care about your assumptions. So think about assumptions. How did I get to this number? And that needs to be plausible. So those are the things you have to think about when you write not only the story, but you're going and writing a pitch deck and present to somebody. We are picky. We are picky because we only have a very limited time on what you say and what you answer. And sometimes the question is not that important. The answer you give is much more important because
Yeah.
with that we can have an interference to what was it that he actually said. So many pitches I've looked at, it was great pitch, but he really messed up on the Q&A, either because they made up a story and it could not work because some of us do know some of the material, or they were, yeah, I'm going to sell $10 million worth of products next year. And you go, okay, great. Are you going to sell that on online or with salespeople? Oh, with salespeople. Okay. Well, in your financial forecast, I don't see one human person hired. And you want to do 10 million? So how are you going to explain that? So be open and transparent. Sometimes we do have
Mhm.
deficiencies, and why can we not talk about it? It's much nicer and much better for us to talk about also those issues than hiding them and trying to be Superman. or superwoman,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
red flags are all over the place. They're different for different people. I look at numbers, other people look at the operations, but in a combination, it really is the flow of the story. You're trying to engage with a person or a fund or an entity, and you're trying to create trust. Same way you would
Yeah.
do a dating, right? When you date, the first date, you're not going to necessarily ask them, how much money do you make and how much is in your bank account? There's certain things you do and you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So you have a lot of experience in being a board advisor in
Yeah.
startup companies. How do you help the leadership team to align and guide them in really growing the company in the right fashion, align the financial reporting, strategic decision making? What role and how do you convince the leadership team of that startup through your board advisor role?
I sometimes compare it to kindergarten, where you're not necessarily tell people what to do, but you tell them how beautiful. And that's for an old example that I've heard many, many times is I want them to build a ship. I'm not telling them to build a ship. I'm telling them how beautiful the ocean is. Because if they can ingrain the idea that it was their idea, they will perform much better than when telling somebody. So a board member is nothing else, in my opinion, than as a catalyst. He
Yeah.
initiates, but he can also control and he can also help. But it is much easier to talk to somebody if they find that there's an added value in a sense of I can talk to them openly, transparent, truthful. And that's the thing about the company, right? If you're in a company, what you're telling the outside world is one thing, but inside of a company, you need to be brutally honest because you're making a lot of decisions based upon those things. And finance is one of them. You can tell the rest of the world, I increased my sales 100%. Well, that sounds great. But if your sales went from 1 to 2, that's 100% right there. Internally, you must say, hey, we're not doing that great. Externally, 100%. Internally, we need to do more. So as a board member, you are responsible to help on add value with your wisdom by not necessarily telling people, but finding out what you can do to add, to make them better. And the best CEOs are the ones who say, you know what? I hire the ones that know more than I do. Those are the ones you want to work with. And it's the same in the board. I was a chairman of a board of a company. I wanted the people to be better than I am
Yeah.
because that makes my job much easier.
So
And
true.
that's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You have done turnaround and restructuring. Let's
Yeah.
spend 5 minutes on this. You know, how does those projects come to you, and what are the first few things that you do when you go in a company as the restructuring person or a fractional CFO in restructuring role, and how do you help those struggling businesses?
Yeah. Well, as they say, we got one mouth and two ears. And that's especially true for turnarounds. You should be listening. Before you give big advice to anything that happens, you should find out the facts. And the facts are sometimes as simple as I'm going to sit at the reception of a company and sit with the receptionist for 2 hours. See who the people that come in, get the mail that comes in. Nothing is filtered. It is pure information right there. So those are things that now everybody's going to go, oh my God, Volker was sitting at the reception and he was listening to the conversations and people coming in. There's a vast amount of information there that when you're sitting in the president's office, it's been filtered out completely because people don't think it's important, but it is important. It might be very important. So listen to all those people, what they have to say, and try to find a team that will work with you and you can get things going. And by the way, it's the typical syndrome. If the spiral goes downwards, it's all negative. If you can only turn it a little bit upwards, people have a positive attitude again. And with a positive attitude comes success. And I know that out of my own experience of companies that I turned around where I basically came in and they're all like, oh my God, here comes somebody who's going to cut down the cost and kill everything. So my first sentence was, I am not going to fire anybody. And people go, oh my gosh, what does that mean? And the question is here, I'm here to support you to run this ship in a different direction. That's all I'm going to do.
Mhm.
And just being very simplistic and giving them back a certain confidence that it is feasible to turn this thing around helps. And given point, went to one of the examples. I used to be in a machine shop that did faucets. It's a very dirty business because it's sand casting. It's a lot of dirt. Here comes Volker, suit and tie, safety shoes on, which look like clown shoes for me, but safety shoes on, glasses on, and I go down to the guy who's all in black. He's fully covered with dust and everything. And I go to him and ask, you know what? I really would like to understand your machine. And he goes, you're the first one in 10 years, and I've been here for 10 years, who's asking how this machine works. You know what? He says, it's this and this and this. And he goes, but I could do this 50% faster. What do you need?
Wow.
What do you need for 50%? I need 1,000 euros and lines. You got it. 1,000 euros, no problem. Go do it. He did next day. We improved that machine by 50%. This was
Wow.
one conversation, 10 minutes, 15 minutes listening to the guy, talking to him. And there is so much wisdom still in that company, in those people. Why not use it? So again, listen, more listening than necessarily talking.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
for me sometimes a little bit difficult. I agree, but it is exactly that.
Yeah, and you gave the example, one mouth, 2 ears. We listen more, speak less is the key to restructuring. I completely get that. Thank you for sharing that wisdom. We have tech founders, we have medtech uh, doctors coming into and inventing some product. How do they get themselves acquainted to financial literacy? And the point that I'm trying to make here is that what they should do, where they should go to really understand the management financial reporting, projections, and all. Think of a tech founder, think of a medtech founder. They are lost. What do they
I,
should do?
this it's fascinating you say that because it is true. Absolutely. They all say, I don't understand finance. And I go, okay, who balances your checkbook? How do you budget anything? And when you talk to them about the real basics, it's not different. There's an in coming in, there's going out, and at the bottom, hopefully something stays. Now that needs to be paid. The stuff that you have expensing, right? You need to buy machines. Well, how do I get financing for the machines? It is it's the rudimentary things. You don't have to understand all the depreciation of all the products that the fixed assets and amortization. All that is lingo, not that important. You will get specialists for it. But what's important that you have a basic understanding. I'm buying my product or I'm building my product for $1 and I'm going to sell it for $3. Okay, so $2 gain. Just a basic concept. When we do, and you know as well as I do, when we do due diligence and we have them pitch, we do ask, so what is the cost of your product? Well, you should be able to answer that. How much of them are you going to sell? Oh, you should have an idea, some rough idea, right? As we said before, you're forecasting and you're trying to get the assumptions to it. But you should also be able to say, how what's the expenses that go along with all this? And what am I going to get at the bottom? And how long am I going to be able to sustain a business? And when am I going to get paid? They're not very difficult questions, in my opinion, but we shy away because we kind of put it in a box and say, oh, that's accounting and finance. This is not my expertise. I'm great
Mhm.
at engineering. Well, if you're an engineer, you know numbers. It's not much different. So I think what we really need to do is instill that confidence in them and saying, it really isn't rocket science. It is not that difficult. And if you still have difficulties, there is organizations out there. Even if you maybe want to take an online course, accounting, if you really want to go into details, or basic finance, 101 finance. But at the end of the day, it is very simple. What comes in, what goes out, and when am I going to be paying back the investor? That's all it is. How am I going to pay back the investor? How much more?
Right, right. Wow, such good lessons from this video cast slash podcast from you, Volker.
Thank you.
I'm sure my audience, and we will do it so that it has the maximum reach. Golden nuggets. Thank you so much for giving me time and recording this today. I would like to do a lot of follow-up interviews with you, maybe very focused on certain topics, and that could be like masterclass series. I would like to. I'll reach out to you and do all those things. But for today, thank you so much for coming on the show and helping me in recording this show. Thank you so much, Walter.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. And to all the founders, best of luck.
Yeah.